Kind of getting prepared, but yeah, it's happening. End of February. We're getting out of here.
We're kind of in a tough spot here.
I'm an immigrant from Ukraine.
Is not a statement of your qualifications in any way.
Starting this business is the worst idea. You just gotta build the houses with blue roofs, bro.
Hold on. I gotta stop you right there.
That's all the easy
Thoughts
stuff.
on the Lex Friedman podcast.
I think I have a problem.
Getting dumbed down.
I feel like everything gives you cancer now, man.
Maybe it's just I was a product of public school.
You're sharing parenthood with the state.
Back in Mike. Anyway,
He's a weird cat. He's a goofy guy.
politics of California don't line up.
It's a free country. Do whatever you like.
All right, Vlad, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the Pseudo Intellectual YouTube channel. One of the most anticipated guests to come out. We've been friends for a while.
High praise, bro.
We've been friends for about 10 years now, and
Yeah, it's
I
been a
get
while.
hit with the news. The news are you are leaving this golden state of California. Within a week or so? It's coming up, right?
No, not. We've got like a month left. So
Okay.
kind of getting prepared, but yeah, it's happening. End of February. We're getting out of here.
I really want to get into this topic because it's so fascinating. As someone who grew up here, enjoyed all the beauties of the Golden Coast, from snowboarding to hitting the coast, now deciding to move out east. Where are you moving exactly?
We're moving to North Carolina, my wife and I.
Okay, so that's the promised land, North Carolina. So it's a big shift from California to North Carolina.
Yeah, straight to the other side.
All right, so let's get into your story, kind of outline a little bit. I didn't really introduce you properly. I'll allow you the honor of introducing yourself. Maybe share with the audience who you are, what do you do for work, maybe your hobbies, and we'll get into your move out of California.
Yeah, so my name's Vlad. I'm 29 years old, so late 20s. I'm an immigrant from Ukraine. We moved with our family to California. What year was it? I think it was 2002 or 2003. And I've been living here ever since. You kind of hit the nail right on the head. It's a great state. You've got the snowboarding, the nature, the beauty, everything. So that's probably one of the things that I'm going to miss the most about this place. But other than that, I feel like there are opportunities elsewhere as well. So we kind of, when we made this decision, we kept an open mind. And what I do for a living kind of allows me to, kind of travel to the East Coast and do some work there. I work for a company called Siemens Mobility, and we are a manufacturing business for rail cars for all of North America, Canada, and South America as well. So my path kind of, with that company led me to a few different opportunities opening, in California, and I've kind of hit the ceiling of what I feel like I can accomplish in California in terms of, just working at our Sacramento facility. And recently we had, the business had decided that we needed to open a second manufacturing facility on the East Coast. So,
Okay, so it sounds like you're not running away necessarily into nowhere. You're running towards something. Yeah. It's not just a push, there's a pull. But I'm assuming there's both, right? There's certain things that are pushing you out of the state, and there's certain things that are attracting you in North Carolina. So maybe let's get into a little bit of that. First, on the push side, what's pushing you out of the state? I know during COVID, there's a lot of movement. Joe Rogan left LA, started kind of bashing it on his podcast. We saw Elon Musk pull out of the state and set up in Austin. Are you part of that exodus? Is that your wave? What led you to make this decision to move out permanently too? It sounds like you're burning the bridges. You're buying the house there. You're closing on the house. And so it's not a trial period. It's not, let me try this out for a month and then I'll be back. Sounds like you made up your mind for sure, for certain.
Well,
you're
Alex,
leaving.
Everything is reversible. So if you end up not liking it, the cool thing about life is you can do whatever you like. If it works out, if you've got your priorities set, and let's say we do move and it doesn't work out, there's a way forward, either to come back or somewhere else. So my wife and I were ready to make that decision to try something new. But to answer your question about, what's pushing me out, I think it's a combination of different things, and some of them being, the politics in California. I think we can all agree, or, well, I should rephrase it. I don't think everyone agrees with me, but my stance is that the politics in California are just not aligned with my own personal identity and kind of what I stand for. Also,
let's dive into that a little bit. I want to double click a little bit on politics, because you're a young guy, right? You're 29. When you say politics of California don't line up, is that boomer talk, or is that now millennials who are waking up to the politics of California? And what specific policies can you kind of identify that are pushing you out, right? Because you're saying politics is pretty general. Is it a specific law? Is it a combination of things? What's that push factor? I'm trying to really
dig deep into this.
Yeah. I'm trying to understand
I
what's
understand
pushing
it.
this.
Yeah, we can dive into it. So a few of the things that I've noticed, and kind of a few of the things that for me I don't really like about California, is kind of the mismanagement, like the leadership I mean, you've seen specifically recently with the Palisades, right? Everything's burning in South California. Just mismanagement on a really high level, from reservoirs not being filled to cutting funding for, fire department, where, living in that area is a very high fire hazard. And I just think over the years, I wasn't always into politics. I didn't always care, but recently I started paying attention more. And I just feel like California is being mismanaged by the current leadership we have here. We've had fires. We know California can burn. And then we have something like the Palisades happen, and which is, in terms of monetary value, the worst natural disaster for...
So you're worried about the fires. Is that what it is?
Well, that's one of the things, right?
What else?
Some other things, California doesn't have the traditional family values that I value myself. California schools are pushing this propaganda and this kind of, you can identify as whatever you want, and then it starts to go into gender affirming care and surgery for children, and then it starts to go into, the schools don't necessarily have to provide any context to the parents about what they're teaching the kids, and if the kids feel like they want to be a boy one day, the girl wants to be a boy.
I think what you're saying with respect to LGBT, right? The concept of America or the American dream is that you can be whoever you want to be here in the States, right? And I think both of our parents left countries where they were suppressed and oppressed because they stood out, right? So from that perspective, I can see that libertarian view of like, all right, you can do whatever you want to do as an adult with another consenting adult, none of my business, right? This attractive libertarian view of the world that you could say is kind of deeply woven into American DNA. When we get into schools, and it really starts getting weird when you see laws about, well, we don't have to tell the parent that the kid is now coming in and identifying as a different gender. And we don't even have to tell or inform the parent that we're now taking steps to affirm his newfound gender identity, right? So I think that's where a lot of people really woke up to what's going on, because
parents are losing their right to become parents, right? You're sharing parenthood with the state, and the state feels like it's, it has every right to teach your kids something that may be conflicting with what you're teaching your kids at home. And you said it right. I mean, if you're an adult and you have certain way you view things, sure, you can. It's a free country, do whatever you like. But I think I have a problem when it becomes much more than that, when it becomes indoctrination of children in those schools to believe certain things that you may not agree with. So for me, that's really important.
Yeah, to sum up, it sounds like one is you don't like the mismanagement on the state government level. And the second, it sounds like the school and the indoctrination of children. And you're not a parent yet, but it sounds like you're planning on it. It sounds like you're taking...
and with the planning, you got to think 5-10 years ahead. And I feel like for me, once I become a parent, I would feel much more comfortable, and also from the experiences I've heard from other people, even my parents living in South Carolina. I have a younger brother who's gone through the school system in South Carolina, and it's much different from what I hear, than California.
So let's also zoom in on that a little bit. You said your parents are already in North Carolina. They
They're
moved out
in South
during-
Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. They moved out fairly recently as well, right? They're part of that COVID exodus
Yeah.
to to South Carolina. So now you're coming to join them in a way, but not really, because you're going to be in a different state technically.
Yeah, different states, still fairly close enough to, come over on the weekends and see them on the weekends. But we're moving to North Carolina. My parents are in South Carolina. It's about a 3-hour drive, so still fairly close, much closer than we were before. So
It's interesting that within the same country, we're now getting fragmentation to a point of people are kind of voting with their feet. They're moving to states with different policies. When I moved here back in 2006 to California, the country felt a lot more unified as far as, the federal policies were fairly consistent. The states differed a little bit, based on their geography, the vibe was a little bit different. But for the most part, it's a pretty consistent landscape as far as the laws went. Now what happened during COVID is we see crazy fragmentation. People are moving, people self-segregating almost. We're getting to this new reality, and it's really interesting and fascinating. Personally, I'm staying in California. I'm hopeful about this state. There's certain things that I don't like, and I share some of the things that you've highlighted. There are concerns, but I'm still hopeful. I'm still betting on California. When you travel across the state, whether it's LA, Tahoe, San Francisco Bay Area, there's still energy in California, and I don't know if it's even energy. I would say it's maybe the nature, the weather, right?
It's a hard state to leave behind, considering what you're leaving, and especially if you've been living here for a while. I would consider California as one of the most beautiful states in the U.S. It was a pretty tough decision, and I totally agree with your standpoint. I hope for California that it becomes better in all of those aspects that I've mentioned. Another thing that kind of helped our decision is just the affordability, right? I mean,
that's huge. Housing affordability. Let's talk about what's the square footage of the house that you've just purchased in North Carolina, and let's compare it to what it would cost you to buy here in California.
Yeah, sure. So we bought a house in North Carolina, not exactly in the city, kind of in the suburbs. It's a 2,800 square foot home. Home's only about 4 years old, and closing price was $390 out the door. So if you compare that with California, and I haven't purchased a home in California before, so this will be our first home purchase, but just comparing the prices and what I've seen on the market is...
Let's zoom out. California housing market varies drastically, right? If you compare San Francisco, San Diego to like Redding, different worlds. But let's just stay in the area that greater Sacramento area, let's say Roseville, West Roseville, El Dorado Hills. I think a house like that would run you close to 800, probably north of 800. Okay, so we're talking about, 390 to 800K. We're talking about a 2x difference, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not getting paid 2x here in California, right? So
no, the disparity between, how your salary and how much what the house prices are, how much homes cost it's so great. Like I've even seen, statistics from just before the financial crisis of 2008. It was about maybe the average median house price was 3 times your salary. Now it's like 6 times your salary. That's average across the US. So, I mean, it helped our decision to move, is seeing how affordable those houses were out there, and knowing that, I have a job opportunity ready and lined up. That kind of gave me like a safety blanket to say, we're going to pull the trigger, see what happens, And I told my wife, in the beginning, she kind of was, a little bit against it. Maybe she was like, what's out there? It's something brand new. We're leaving family behind. But, with the thought of, hey, everything's reversible. We can decide that we don't want to live there. It's just one of those things we decided we want to try it, and we'll see. And I feel like a lot of people are scared to make that initial move and try something new because, maybe they're comfortable. But again, they also might have different priorities.
Yeah, I think that's really healthy framing of this whole situation. It kind of reminds me of how my parents framed the decision to move to the United States. We kind of were on the fence for a couple of years. We had the paperwork ready to go, kept asking for an extension. We just got to a point back in Belarus where we had better living accommodations. My parents were close to paying off a condo in a good part of the city. So things were looking up. And now we had this opportunity to move to the United States. And so it wasn't easy because we were leaving friends, family. And what my dad said and the way he framed it to us, he was like, look, we might never get this opportunity ever again. And what's the worst that can happen, right? Let's go do a little sabbatical. We'll spend 6 months there. If it's really that horrible, if it's as bad as the Russian and Belarusian propaganda makes it out to be, we can always come back. We don't have to sell anything, right? And so we just picked up and left. And it allowed us to kind of shed that weight of like, I'm moving to this place forever and ever. And it's the final decision. We're just like, let's go check it out.
What was that propaganda like? Like, can you, because I don't know Belarus, and I don't remember much from,
it's not even propaganda, but, the Cold War era rhetoric of like, the evil capitalists or whatever, it's all a lie, anyway, we wanted to check out, what is it really like? And so we got a pretty good comparison and we said, hey, this is fun. Let's try it out. And I think my parents were in their late 30s and they were kind of hitting a wall. And so it was a good fresh start for them. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of reinvent yourself, right? Start in a new place. But I don't think it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows, right? You're leaving your siblings here. You got your brother, your sister, you got all of your friends over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
Cutting yourself in a social way, right? You got your parents, whatever, a couple hours away, but all your friends, all your siblings, they're staying here in California. What are your thoughts on that? Are you confident you're going to be able to establish new relationships or like quality friendships there in this new town? Or
I think so. I wouldn't say I'm the most social person, but I feel like I make the best of those situations. And I feel like we could establish a community. We could, make friends. I am pretty sad about the fact that we're leaving a lot of friends behind, but sometimes that's the way life goes. You've got to make a hard decision and one that's best for your family.
All right. So in the beginning of the podcast, you kind of mentioned that you moved here from Ukraine, and Ukraine is a hot topic in the news. There's almost fatigue talking about Ukraine now these days. How has your Ukrainian heritage shaped your life here in the United States? What kind of insights did you get from that experience of being a Ukrainian immigrant?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I moved when I was fairly young, only 6 years old. So I wouldn't say I had the full experience of what it's like to live, in an Eastern European country. I still have that, that heritage. I still know the language. And I've been trying to hold on to that because at the end of the day, that's your roots, right? Your ancestors, your family, they come from there. For me, I feel a little bit more attached to the American culture because I've spent so much time here and I basically grew up here. But at the same time, I still feel attached to my Ukrainian heritage as well. And, it's pretty sad to see what's happening right now in Ukraine with the war and everything. But the way it's shaped for me is I always think back to this moment where I have this memory when we were immigrating to the U.S., how excited, I don't really recall details, but I remember how excited I was about this. We got on a plane for the first time. We spent the night in New York when we were actually flying here. And for me, it was like this big new world that it was just super exciting, So I thank my parents for this opportunity. They came here and they brought us to a country where, we can make something of ourselves and where, for the most part, it's a country where you can be treated fairly. You can, succeed. You have the tools. You have the tool belt for success here, I would say. There's just a lot of opportunities. And I don't know how this is all tying into your question. I kind of want to land
controversial
the plane here.
question, yeah.
I want to land the plane.
Let me make it real straightforward. Yeah. Do you identify as an American or Ukrainian first, if you had to choose?
I identify as Ukrainian. Okay. I think for me, it's where you were born, where your heritage is from, your lineage, your ancestors. That's who you are, regardless of where you're living for most of your life. But that's your blood. That's you're from Ukraine, and I identify when people ask me, I say I'm Ukrainian. So
Have you gotten naturalized as a U.S. citizen?
naturalized, you mean like citizenship? Yeah. So I did go through the citizenship process. This was after I had turned 18.
So you
My
gave an
parents-
oath to these United States to revoke
did.
any prior allegiances, and but you're saying you're Ukrainian first. I get it. I'm just playing devil's advocate here a little bit.
Well, allegiance is one thing, right?
The reason I'm kind of getting deep down into this identity issue is, with the new administration coming in, there's mass deportations going on. We'll see how massive they are. In reality, right now, I feel like a lot of the stuff we're seeing on the news is a little bit of posturing. But when you said I'm Ukrainian first, is that true for other immigrants as well? Right.
I guess you'd have to ask them.
But I think the people that are getting deported are not citizens, are not even green card holders. They're illegals. Speaking of Trump, do you think Trump will be able to end this war? I know the campaign included a lot of bold statements. I'll finish the war on my second day in office. I'll finish the war before I even get into the office. What do you think, if you're a betting man, which I know you are because we have some poker nights?
That's one thing I'll miss most, man, is our poker nights.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
That's how I should have introduced you. You're the
Yeah.
you're the perfect host for poker. You got the real tables, the real deal, and really you've built a community around that and real solid games.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a betting man, what probability would you assign for Trump being able to come to some sort of settlement, maybe a ceasefire this year in 2025?
I think as far as the ceasefire, I think it's entirely possible. However, I don't think that he'd be able to end the war in the first year of his presidency. If I had to bet, I would say maybe in his term, which is 4 years. I'm hoping for, the sooner the better, because a lot of lives are being lost. An entire generation is being wiped out, of my people and, people in Russia as well. So it's very sad to see. And those people that will survive, I feel like a lot of them won't be the same. So it's just kind of a hard subject to just throw a bet on, but I'm hoping it's soon. I don't think that you're right. Trump made a lot of bold statements and promises in his race, presidential race, but I think his first priority would be the American people. And you can see that by his executive orders and everything he's done in the first few weeks of being president, is he's hyper focused on the American people. I think everything comes secondary to that for Trump. And I really hope, for the best in this situation. I'm not super fluent in geopolitics or what it takes to end a war or anything like that. I'm just hopeful that Trump can at least get those two leaders to the table to begin those discussions. I've listened to podcasts from Zelensky. I've also listened to Putin speak, and they are I feel like from my observation, they're very far from getting to a deal.
Thoughts on the Lex Friedman podcast interviewing
Oh boy, here we go.
interviewing Zelensky. That was a fun one. I watched it in the original format, so you kind of flip-flopped from Russian to Ukrainian and then to English. And what I've learned is Lex does not know Ukrainian. And me being Belarusian, I was like, dude, you need to step it up a little bit. But he also came in with almost this naive, childish perspective, like, hey, let me just talk to him and he's going to end the war. Yeah. I thought it was funny, but I think it came from a honest place. I think Lex is very genuine and authentic. And I love the guy. I ever since I discovered him on JRE, I want to say 3-4 years ago, I listened to a decent amount of his podcasts, so all love, but that podcast was almost out of character. I don't know if he was nervous. I think it's a very high stakes podcast. Maybe, I don't know what happened there.
I mean, you're interviewing a leader of a country that's at a full scale war, going from interviewing just specialists or scientists to this guy runs a country and they're in war right now. So I'm sure there was a little bit of nervousness, but I totally agree with his naive approach. I mean, a lot of the things he said, I was just like, man, I get where you're coming from. In a perfect world, sunshine and rainbows, but Zelensky has seen a lot of things. He's seen how his people are suffering. So I also understand his perspective when he's really firm on his stance and he wants Russia to pay, You know, he wants Putin to pay for what he's done. And Lex is kind of coming from the perspective of, oh, well, everyone's human. He just loves his country. He loves his people. You know, you guys will be able to work something out. And it's hard to, like, someone who's been through trauma or someone who's seen traumatic things to try to, you know, get them to accept that.
I think both of them need an off-ramp, right? Like, you can't just say, just kidding, we're going to end this war. And by the way, we're going to give a whole chunk of our, the people that lost relatives, that lost a brother, a dad on the front line will not understand a decision like that, right? So whoever sets up this deal or ceasefire, they need real smart people in the room to allow off-ramps for both Putin and Zelensky. They need to sell success to their people. They need to come back and say, hey, we did not just we don't know the true casualties of war, right? Because right now what we're getting is wartime propaganda from both sides. And so you can't just come in and say, hey, guys, just kidding. We, you know, well, let's all be friends. And so real interests of both countries need to be taken into account for anything to materialize, for any real chance at a peace deal. So it's really challenging. I hope Trump has the wisdom or the carrot or the stick that he can apply in a way that makes this issue resolved, because, yeah, it's been going on since 2022, right? We're coming up on 3 years here. So it would be a good milestone to finally put an end to this senseless suffering. And I know we're both feel maybe a little bit more closer to this issue just because we're from that area and we understand that it would be us on the front line because this is our age group.
I think Trump is fully motivated to do that, though, because, you know, making a big promise like that and then following up on it and actually making it happen, it just will highlight how effective he is as a president. And I think that's his goal in this term. So I definitely think he's going to give it the attention that it needs.
Really hope so, man. Really hope you're right.
Have you ever considered moving out of California?
I have, especially during COVID, during the lockdowns. I was like, dude, this is crazy. You need to homestead, need to buy some acreage, need to get out of...
You went that far. You went homestead, having a bunker, maybe.
It was a momentary idea. I think it was like really popular online at the time. I think my parents talked a lot about moving out of the state, and they were kind of encouraging us like, hey, let's all move out. And we told them, hey, you don't have to move out of California to live in the countryside. Like Northern California has a lot of, you know, pretty rural areas. So
where was their direction? Where did they want to move?
They kind of wanted to go to the promised land of, you know, North, South Carolina.
Really?
And I think what stopped them is our unwillingness to move. My wife's job is tied to California. My brother is also working in the medical area here where he's being more it's one of the highest paid areas. You know, your wife is doing the same thing in the medical field. So
she's
she's going to take a pay cut moving to North Carolina. So,
well, she won't take a pay cut if she never started working here in the first place. So for her, the baseline will be salary in North Carolina. But yeah, no, North California is like the highest paid medical, you know, salaries.
Yeah. So moving out of California, maybe. Honestly, I still need to travel these United States a little bit more. I've visited a lot of states in the Midwest, kind of the Southern belt. What that experience showed me is that California is actually a good place to be, but I've never really explored the East Coast. And so I think that's still, you know, I'm just ignorant of what it's like. And I really need to do like either a road trip or just have.
I'll tell you what, we bought a house. We've got plenty of rooms. I'm going to get that guest house ready. You guys come take a trip to North Carolina. We'll show you around. Maybe you like it. Maybe you don't. But you definitely got to come visit me. Yeah,
we'll definitely check it out. One thing I'll say, though, is there is this kind of growing concern with like California policies. But are you worried about, you know, being surrounded by rednecks? Are you worried about not being accepted as an immigrant, as a Ukrainian? Do you worry about any of the quote unquote racism towards you or not fitting in on that side? Because California is a melting pot. It's very accepting.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm worried about that at all. And just from my experience being in North Carolina, the people there are pretty pretty good people. I mean, I can't say that for everybody, but overall, they have that, Southern hospitality. People are nice to each other. People, will have conversations. It's not, I feel like in California, everybody is so in their bubble. Everybody's on a mission. Everybody's on the grind.
But don't you want that as a young guy? Don't you want that energy that?
Well, we'll get to that. I'll explain my reasoning behind, how the grind and North Carolina kind of coincide together for me. But what I was saying is I don't think there will be a problem fitting in. And a lot of times people don't even realize that I am an immigrant. People think that,
you could pass. You're whitewashed.
I can pass as an American. I don't think I have much of an accent, but yeah, what I was saying about the hustle and, in California, I feel like it's very saturated, right? Whether you're starting a business, whether you have a skill working for a company, it is very saturated to the point where it has a dense population. There's a big talent pool to choose from, right? Whereas my experience, even trying to hire people for my own team in North Carolina, has been very dry. It's been hard to find people with the skill set that I'm looking for. And I feel like for me, taking my skill set to the East Coast.
I think that's hiring in general, though. Just to kind of share my experience with hiring in California, we were looking for specialized labor. So to be more specific, people with an engineering degree in civil engineering. And I was surprised with the quality of candidates that we got here in California. A lot of them were, people that couldn't speak English properly, could not answer questions directly, like the most basic things. And we had pretty softball interviews. And after being on like 3 or 4 panels, trying to hire engineers, man, it really opened up my eyes on how secure my job was and how secure my position was, because we were getting, real low quality applicants, and that's after intense screening, right? So we threw out a bunch of applications.
I agree with that, but like at least you're getting applicants. You're getting people walking through the door and having some form of skill set. Whereas I'm hiring, our facility is located in a town of 20,000 people, right? And it has surrounding areas. It's very spread out, but like I'm having trouble even getting people to apply for these positions that are qualified, You at least have a talent pool to choose from,
Got it. So it's just no applicants. You guys would hire anybody with a pulse. Are these manufacturing jobs?
So what I specialize in is the commissioning and test side of manufacturing. So, we build our rail vehicles in-house, everything from welding the frame together to installing all the parts, getting the car, basically ready for test. And my team is responsible for doing all of the validation testing on these vehicles. We're the first ones to put the power on the car. We do software testing, functional testing, A to Z testing, basically, and commissioning.
And so you guys are part of this big push for multimodal transportation, right? You're producing train carts. And so I know Caltrans is one of your customers on track. What are your thoughts on multimodal transportation, rail versus traveling on the freeway? Why are we not seeing more implementation? And I know you're a little bit biased because that's literally the business you're in, is producing train carts. But have you guys seen an increase in orders coming in? Is there a push towards?
So I'll tell you this, our business over the last 5 years has grown so much to the point where we had to build another 200 acres facility just to keep up with the projects and contracts coming in. We kicked off our heavy rail coach passenger car platform in the US only about 5, maybe 6 years ago. Our first customer was Brightline from Florida. We built the first coaches in the US for Brightline. Siemens US, basically the first coaches that came from our factory were for Brightline. Now, even more recently, Brightline has kind of expanded to the West Coast, and they will be building the first high-speed rail in America as well.
Oh wow! So you're up close and personal with high-speed rail as well. I thought you guys were dealt more with like the larger type carts, but these are brand new orders. Are these coming from California?
Yeah, so this high speed, well, technically there will be a third facility in Horseheads, New York. That'll be our facility for the high-speed contract. But this Pioneer 220 model that we'll be building for Brightline West, it's basically going to be going from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. That'll be the first high-speed rail. And there are a lot of trains that claim high speed, but they're not true high speed if they're not going above 200 miles an hour. And our Pioneer 220 is about 220 miles an hour. So that'll be the first true high speed in America. We had the privilege of winning that contract, and I'm pretty excited for that future of Siemens to go that direction.
Right on. So it's a German company thriving in the United States while VW, Volkswagen, is really struggling. I don't know if you've seen the news headlines about VW cutting their workforce, and they're like one of the biggest employers in Germany, but they're really struggling to compete with Chinese EV automakers, right? And so it looks like VW might be going out of business after all these years.
Wow, that's pretty...
Well,
I didn't see that, right, but that's pretty crazy.
I might have made a very bold statement. I know they're struggling, and I know they're leaning out, and I know whatever they're doing right now is not working out, and they're on a trajectory towards bankruptcy. Whether or not they'll make it out, whether or not they'll be able to pivot and put a cheap EV out on the market that is attractive to buyers, that's a big question. I think it's only achievable if EU imposes tariffs on the Chinese automakers. That's what we're doing here, right? We're saying 200% tariffs on Chinese EVs. It's a security threat, Tesla's only. That's the message.
That's one of the cool things about mobility as well, is that some of our contracts have Buy America requirements, right? They're, maybe they are companies that have, funding from the government that need to do a fleet replacement or just enlarge their fleet. And, for instance, for Amtrak, Amtrak is a Buy America contract. So we're building roughly 600 vehicles for them. It's billions of dollars, and we have to build them here in the U.S. A lot of the suppliers we use have to be in the U.S. as well. So I've seen that shift towards U.S. manufacturing even prior to Donald Trump's presidency, and I think that's a good direction for the mobility industry.
Yeah. Buy America, just to kind of double click on that, my understanding of it is the contract requires you to source some of your raw material. Sometimes it's steel, sometimes it's components from American companies, and sometimes it will drive up the price, but it's a contractual requirement, especially if you're getting federal money. Federal government is very interested in you stimulating the economy by your manufacturing. Otherwise, people just kind of source everything from China, and yes, we're manufacturing it here, but really Chinese are still benefiting. So speaking of China and Buy America and EVs and trains, China has an issue of building too many high-speed trains. I've seen a headline that China is now concerned that they've built too many high-speed rail miles to where they're maybe not having the customer base for it. It's crazy to see that they're able to advance so quickly and so fast comparing to the efforts here domestically in California, and billions of dollars spent on this project that looks like it's finally taking off, and there's some construction going on. But we're talking about decades and billions of dollars synced into this project. What do you think is behind China being able to build so aggressively compared to the United States?
My guess is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but not knowing much about the political landscape in China, my guess is less bureaucracy, less permitting, less environmentalists, less all of this, right? I feel like that plus how cheap it is to build things in China is the reason why they're able to achieve all these things so quickly and so effectively. Here in the US, just to put it into perspective, I mean, there are so many hoops you have to jump through just to build a rail, through 100 miles, 200 miles in California. There's so much bureaucracy and so much permitting and so many rules and policies that it's just becoming really hard for that industry.
Yeah. And, I think the new administration coming in, they're very anti-regulation, deregulation. That gives you hope. But a lot of these regulations are enacted by Congress. It's federal law. It's in the U.S. government federal code of regulations. So it's not something you can just kind of pivot from in a day. It requires real diligent work from people who really know what they're doing to try to deregulate in a responsible way. Because yes, China is successful at building fast because whatever the leader says goes, and nobody questions the decisions and nobody asks for that permit. We live in a country where there's a rule of law, and you can't just bypass laws, and there is, certain environmental
You can
regulations.
if you sign an executive order.
Yeah, but there are some common sense regulations that are needed, right? You can't just play without rules. You can't just pollute our waters.
But I think we can all agree that drying out the entirety of the Los Angeles area for the sake of saving the Delta smelt was probably a mistake.
That's a controversial topic. Let's get into that.
We touched on that a little bit. Huh?
Yeah, so I'm not super informed on that. From what I understand, there's like salinity levels that are required for that fish to survive, right? And then so you have to keep this very delicate balance of salinity level in the water, seawater and fresh water kind of encroaching onto each other. So it's a delicate balance. I think it's not a new issue, right? They've dealt with this for years. Now it's back in the news. And so, again, not a black and white issue. It comes down to priorities. Do we value human lives? Do we value the fish? But the fish is more of a part of that ecosystem where I think it has a pretty short lifespan. And so if that fish dies, that indicates additional issues in the ecosystem. So it's not just about the fish. The fish is just kind of like a marker for the health of the ecosystem overall. So if you start messing with that natural balance, there's some downstream impacts that are not super obvious. Now, with that being said, again, I don't feel like I'm terribly informed on the subject, but it's not as simple as just, let's just keep all the water and let this ecosystem die. I think there are other things you can do. You can build more reservoirs. You can engineer some solutions. Again, going through the permitting process is getting impossible. It's like the regulations just keep growing. There's no mechanism to get rid of regulation. There's only mechanisms to add additional regulations, to grow the requirements, to grow the checklist, to grow the permits.
Which another thing that was very surprising to me was, I guess maybe I wouldn't say surprising, it's California, but hearing that on average, the people that were affected by those wildfires in LA would have to wait 18 months or so for permitting and all that stuff to go through before they can start to rebuild seems a little bit insane to me, considering that these people won't have access, to their property, their area of living, just because, we have to get all these permits and, it has to be checked with the environmentalists and all that stuff. For me, it's a little crazy to think that we prioritize that over the well-being of people. And I know it's,
to be fair though,
it's a nuanced topic.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's ecosystems, there's this, there's that, but I think that there has to be a line to where we say, okay, maybe we've done way too much. Maybe, there should be a balance. And I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but to me, that's crazy.
Yeah, so the fires are a little bit interesting. I was part of the response to the fires back in 2018, the Woolsey fires around Malibu. So the other day, I got a notification on my phone on this day, and it literally shows me some of the photos that I took around Malibu area, Bell Canyon. There's a funny story, actually. Went out there to do some oversight on the government hired contractors, basically clearing out debris from the sites where the building has fully collapsed, right? So I got to talk to some of the homeowners. I saw the frustration. I've met some of the people who lost houses and did not have insurance. I talked to some of the retirees who know that they simply can't afford to rebuild because their home will be reassessed at a value that they can't pay the property taxes, because if they were grandfathered into a lower rate. Now they build a new house, gets reassessed. They can't afford out of their pension. They're on a fixed income, right? Social Security, whatever. So it's a very complex issue. Clearly the lessons were not learned, right? We're right back to square one. Now, what is it, 5 years later? 2018, 7 years later, quick math, right back to square one with basically having the same scenario in the same area. And there was nothing done over that time to prevent it. Now, was that an act of God that we couldn't engineer against? I don't know. Did we try? I don't think we've tried, right? And so,
I mean, in your perspective, civil engineering, you kind of know what's going on in California on that level. What is your perspective? What do you think? Was this mismanagement? Was this just plain, like someone dropped the ball, or just the response from leadership was like, this is not a priority. Like, we're not going to clear the forests and clear the dry, fallen trees, and we're not going to do all this and that in preparation for fire season. Like, what's your perspective?
All right, so there's a couple issues there. One is the response after the fires, and there's preventive measures for the fires, right? So as far as prevention goes, it sounds like they actually had a pretty good wet year last year that led to a lot of brush growing and then drying out this year and becoming pretty good fuel for the fire. Could they've done more potentially as preventative measures? But I wanted to talk a little bit more on the response side. I think back in 2018, because I was so up close to Cal OES response to those fires, I know that they really tried. Like there's a lot of people in government, Ventura, LA County, they really try to put together this program to create this program for free site cleanup, right? The idea is we come in and we use federal funds or state funds to help with the debris cleanup to at least alleviate that burden from the homeowners. So it was a good idea. What ended up happening, it took them a while to get this program up and running. It took them a while to do the contracting, to get the contractors on board to a point where people were basically homeless for months, waiting for the government to kind of go through the process, go through the motions of their own internal processes. It's not like these people were just sitting around waiting, but because of the bureaucracy, because of all the requirements, it takes a while to onboard a contractor, especially for a contract of this size, and then train the people, send them out to do the response. Now, maybe FEMA could have done more. That's a separate question on that response. But I know that LA County, Ventura County, they did what they could. Cal OES, they did what they could. They weren't very effective at it. And I don't know if you can point to one specific bureaucrat or one specific law. It's a combination of things, right? It's a combination of laws and regulations that make rapid response almost impossible.
Which brings me to my statement of mismanagement, right? When it's a culmination of all these things done wrong, and there's a head of state that's responsible for a lot of those things, it's only fair to assume that he has grossly mismanaged the state. And that's my stance. I don't like Gavin Newsom. I don't think he's good for California. I think he's done a pretty terrible job of keeping this state healthy and helping the state thrive.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit just for the sake of argument. Doesn't necessarily mean that I completely...
Newsom pays your check, I know. So
yeah, don't expose me like that. But I'm on the payroll. Hey, so with this response, he did some good things. Like he basically passed some legislature to allow these homeowners in Palisades to rebuild without the coastal permit permission, which is a huge help because that permit is difficult to obtain. I worked on projects where I had to obtain coastal permits, and I know it's a pain to get those. So for him to do that, that's a huge step, right? So I think that there are lessons learned that are being implemented. Maybe they're just being implemented at a slower pace that a lot of these victims would like to see. Availability of water in the fire hydrants. I saw that in the news. I don't know how much validity there is to that. Did the firefighters pull up and was there no water in the fire hydrant? That's a concerning issue.
I mean, we've seen also videos of homeowners just turning on their garden hose and there being no water pressure. So I can only imagine, if there's not enough water pressure for a garden hose this diameter, what's happening with the fire hydrants, Right. It all comes from the city water or whatever kind of supply, maybe reservoir it has, right?
Yeah, again, I'll play devil's advocate. I don't think that was a good outcome, but there's certain scenarios you can't design for. Like you can't design for a roadway for a drunk driver, right? You can't design for 3-4 fires happening simultaneously around the same area, different parts, right? You can over design, but there's a cost component. Like you can engineer a house to be very seismically resistant, right? This house will survive a pretty high magnitude earthquake, but there's a variable that is cost, right? So we understand that we can't build every single house to that standard because they'll be prohibitively expensive. So
you just got to build the houses with blue roofs, bro.
That's a different controversy. That's the Hawaii fires, right?
The Hawaii and California too.
All
this ties in together.
I was off TikTok, so I didn't see those.
No, what do you think about that? Actually, there's a lot of conspiracies floating around about this direct energy lasers and weapons starting these fires. And
yeah, I think anytime there's a tragedy or any hot topic in the news, there'll be grifters, there'll be people that will try to make money by spinning up a very clickbaity news story, and they just spread like wildfire, no pun intended, right? And so Yeah. So when it comes to direct energy lasers, dude, I'm not informed on that subject, but some of the memes and some of the explanations I saw were really hand wavy. They did not stand to my level of, I guess, technical analysis, or what they'd really have to try harder to convince me that it was who's behind this, who's benefiting from these fires, right?
Well, they had said that there was this smart city proposal, right? And
there's a lot of proposals. There's proposals for every
hear
city.
Hear me out. The three cities on this smart city proposal was the city that was affected in Hawaii. I think it was Lahaina, right?
Okay, this sounds about right. That's Maui.
And the second city was Los Angeles. And the third city, actually close to home for me soon, would be Charlotte in North Carolina.
Buy fire insurance.
There we go. But it's crazy because like everybody was amazed at how, I wouldn't say amazed, but appalled at how quickly the fire spread in Hawaii, right? It was like something they'd never seen before. Like it was crazy. Same thing with LA. Like it just so happened on this day was very like 100-mile-an-hour winds, and something got sparked, and it just wreaked havoc on the entire area.
Though? Like I think once you look at the videos, you can see the wind kind of like just throwing embers around. Like
for
crazy.
Sure. And once the fire started, it's hard to control.
Yes, and it has very specific topography. And my understanding is that there's these canyons that when that airflow comes through, it just accelerates them like through a tunnel, and they come out at like super high velocity, and so they're just spread it at a rate that you can't do anything about. I think it's very humbling for us to understand that like there's certain things we're just completely powerless. Like when these firefighters come out and you see a huge brush fire on a hill, right? They can't get there with a truck. Super high wind. They can't. Do
you think building with materials that are fire retardant would be a good idea for California, or is that not cost effective? Because I've heard also some buildings and some businesses like that mall. There was a mall in the Palisades or something that was completely unharmed and untouched because of the fire retardant material that was used in the building. Like, is that something that's, I would say, possible for the people that live in California?
Yeah, there's some common sense things you can do when you're building in high danger areas. Based on, there's plenty of risk assessment maps out there about the fire risks. And so what you could do is build with metal roofs. You can incorporate automatic sprinkler systems that will kind of like the commercial buildings, they have these, or like high-rise buildings, they'll have sprinkler systems. Now that doesn't help if you don't have water pressure, right?
Yeah.
But there are things you can do. And I mean, the way we build things here in California is largely driven by seismic considerations, right? I grew up in Eastern Europe where we build from masonry, like bricks. We didn't have to design for lateral forces, right? And those tend to be pretty fire resistant as well, right? Because it's not made out of wood and materials that will catch fire. But obviously in California, you got the seismic threat, so you need to build these light structures that are seismically resistant. They can resist wind, resist seismic loading, and so we're kind of in a tough spot here. You got the cost of the building, cost of the material, you got seismic, you got fire.
But what I understood from that fire retardant material, I don't mean like building, buildings out of metal, but I think it was even like the siding of these buildings, or the stucco or something that they used had like specific compound in it that was like very fire retardant. I don't know if you're aware. I don't know much about it, but it's
same. I don't think I'm well informed. My automatic question would be, are these materials cancerous? I feel like when I hear fire retardant, it's like, is that going to give you cancer? Is there going to be a class action lawsuit?
Everything gives you cancer now, man.
Yeah.
Anywhere you live, Prop 65 all over everywhere in California. Go to McDonald's, you're getting cancer.
Let's see what RFK does about that.
I'm excited for his term.
RFK is a controversial character.
He's a weird cat. He's a goofy guy. He's got a bit of a a weird voice too. It's kind of hard to listen to him speak, but I feel like he's not afraid to challenge these institutions and these pharmaceutical companies on their bullshit.
Yeah.
Forgive my French,
we have these
but
sacred cows of like, oh, you can't criticize anything that has to do with a pharmaceutical company. Why?
Yeah. Why? Who said? Right?
Why not?
Who made that rule?
Because they sponsor, CNN and NBC. Yeah. Now they're untouchable. Yeah, I think anyone can be scrutinized, and if there's a question, that
There
is
was
legitimate, we should be able to ask
Elizabeth Warren, I think there was like a interview, or there was like a hearing where RFK was up and he was talking to Elizabeth Warren, and she was saying something to him like along the lines of like, hey, you shouldn't sue like pharmaceutical companies, and he straight up said, no, you can't. I can't promise that I'm not going to sue pharmaceutical companies or challenge any pharmaceutical companies on what they're doing, which I think that's kind of brave for him to do considering his family history, but he seems like he wants to make some waves, so that'll be exciting to see what he does.
I recently became a dad like 6 months ago. So with RFK, and when he wants to scrutinize the vaccine schedule for kids specifically, I'm like, yeah, let's take a look. Because when somebody is driven by incentive to put more vaccines on there, because every single person, every single baby being born here will have to get it, that's a recurring subscription model, right? Every single kid,
money.
And they're making good money of every single vaccine. And so, yeah, just follow the money, right? That's where you're being taught. When you start thinking critically, follow the money. Do I really need all these vaccines? Now, I'm not a medical professional. I don't have a strong opinion on mRNA or whatever vaccine, but I think people that are competent, that are educated in this area, should be able to scrutinize and ask questions. What is the essential number of vaccines? At which point, is it counterproductive when you get 20 vaccines, 40 vaccines? Where do you stop? Where do you draw the line?
Now, if the vaccine was the cure-all and there was no other alternatives, I think people would think a little differently. But when there's tried and true methods of symptom relief and helping people that have this, virus with other methods, I'll just name off a few, like ivermectin or any other kind of remedies or any kind of health benefits.
Horse medicine.
Yeah, that was the headline. Oh, don't take horse medicine or horse dewormer or whatever. This is not going to help you. And then now we're finding out that ivermectin actually was effective in treating that, and like the whole entire mainstream media was just clowning on people that were doing this.
Yeah,
and
that was a wild time. That was a twilight zone for sure. I don't want to linger on COVID too much. Let's look forward. Let's look ahead. 2025. The stock market seems to be at a weird point. Like, are we going to see more rallies? Are we going to see a big correction downwards? U.S. economy seems like there's a lot of optimism, but at the same time, we're overdue for a correction. A lot of mixed signals all the way around. What is your read on 2025? Are you optimistic about this year? Sounds like you are, because you're making a lot of big moves, but what do you think about the economy in general?
I'm an optimist by default. It takes a lot for me to kind of back down from an optimistic view on things. So I have a lot of optimism for 2025. I think the new leadership is doing a lot of good things in the first few weeks. I think they have the capacity to turn this around, and by turn this around, I mean the economy, the direction, bring more jobs back to the U.S., turn around the economy, all these things that Trump is doing on the sideline, imposing tariffs, proposing a crazy one, which I never thought I would see in my lifetime, but proposing to get rid of income tax. Like, that's crazy. I don't know what the consequences are for the U.S. economy if that happens, but it's just it looks like there are a lot of waves being made and a lot of changes coming in 2025. I have real hope that it's going to be a good year for us.
I think there's definitely a lot of appetite for change, and there's a lot of appetite for risk on, and let's make some bold moves and bold changes. With that being said, if you think about where we are with respect to the rest of the world, the United States having the reserve currency status and kind of being the benefactor of the world order since the World War II, right, where we are able to export our inflation to other countries by the means of dollar printing. We are the benefactor of this system. We have a pretty good system that benefits us, where we export dollars and we get back products from China, we get cars from Japan. And so we got a pretty good setup. Now we're saying we're going to go ahead and completely disrupt that. We don't have any guarantees that the disruption will result in a better system. It might result in a worse system, right? So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm also worried about just this wild card. Just let's roll the dice and see where this goes. We got to impose tariffs. We got to do this, that. Well, these products will go to a different market. If they can't sell them on the US market because of the high tariff, that might go to the new emerging markets. And what are we producing here now? Like, we had to buy masks from China during
Well,
COVID. Remember the mask shortage? We couldn't produce masks. So
if our biggest net export is the US dollar, then I think it only makes sense to replace that with something worthwhile, right? Like bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, actually produce US made goods for the rest of the world. And I know that seems like a stretch because of, cost of labor is so expensive as compared to China, but
the union laws, the labor.
At the end of the day, what choice does America have? I mean, we do have some agriculture. I don't think we're a big agriculture export to the rest of the world. But other than that, we're exporting the U.S. dollar. That's the biggest export in the U.S.
Well, iPhones and technology, Meta, we got some Google, we got some big names in Silicon Valley. I mean, that's a global export. Yeah, but beyond that, we lost our manufacturing base. And so bringing that back is definitely a good move for national security. We'll see what happens, man. I think time will tell. Again, I'm cautiously optimistic and a little worried about the reshuffling of the world order. You see, China, Russia, a lot of contenders to disrupt. BRICS countries are rising. So
I think there's going to be a big race on this new AI theme, and we even saw that this week with China announcing DeepSeek, right? What that did to the market in the U.S. market for AI companies, right? China's claiming that DeepSeek, took them a couple months and $6 million, and all of these U.S. tech companies and AI companies are severely overpriced. So investors saw that as a sign to short or to sell. And I think we lost over the last few days, we lost quite a bit of value and market cap on those specific companies. So I think the next big thing is going to be the race to AI perfection.
Yeah, that's true. That's a whole different area where whoever is able to develop AGI, artificial general intelligence, is going to be on top, right? There's no question about it. It's probably one of the most...
I've heard the new term also beyond AGI is ASI, is the superintelligence, artificial superintelligence.
So like Skynet type.
That's something way above, I'm trying to get myself educated, but it sounds pretty crazy, to say the least,
All right, Vlad, I got another question to ask you. You did not really follow the traditional beaten path of go to college, get your 4-year degree, and then, start an entry-level job. You decided to opt out, kind of try different things in your 20s, and then kind of you found your niche with this company, Siemens. You were able to grow within the company, get your project management certificate, PMP, and kind of rise through the ranks without the degree. I'm kind of inspired by that and kind of motivated to see that you were able to do that without getting into student debt, without, I don't know if I should say wasting, but spending 4 to 5 years obtaining your bachelor's degree. Can you talk more about how you were able to kind of hack the system and get to bachelor level job without ever getting the degree? What's the secret sauce? Put us on.
So secret sauce. I don't know if it's much of a secret sauce, but I'll tell you my perspective. In my early 20s and right after high school, I didn't really subscribe to the idea that school is mandatory. No matter how much this was told to me, by my parents and by everybody else, like you got to go to a 4-year, you got to get your degree and move forward. For me, it was hard to accept that because I'm the type of person that likes to learn while actively trying something for myself. So, I had the opportunity to go to college right after high school. I tried that. Did not like it at all, dropped out, wanted to party, wanted to, try things, wanted to do whatever I was doing, hang out with friends, and just, it wasn't my priority. I feel like I was still a little bit immature in that age where I didn't really lock in and didn't focus in and say, okay, this is something I have to do. I kind of just winged it, and I was like, what happens, happens, So I got this opportunity to work for Siemens, and I started with the company almost 9 years ago, and it was a very low entry-level position, working as an assemblyman. But I quickly grew to realize that this is a great company. It has a good culture. It has a lot of opportunities. And I started kind of branching out of my comfort zone a little bit, looking for opportunities within the company. The first opportunity was, to join the test department, where, I'd be trained as a technician and do a series of functional testing, do a series of electrical troubleshooting, system troubleshooting, and just figure out how our product works. And for me, that was very exciting because I like to know how things work. I feel like I have the engineer mindset kind of. So, I joined the test department, and me and my friend David, colleague, I met him through work, but also a very good friend of mine now. We quickly climbed the ranks to be one of the top performing, teams, because generally you have technicians working in teams of two. So we were pretty, I would say, some of the top performers in the department when it comes to, throughput and how much work we were doing and how effective it was. So for me, that was really cool. I was learning the skills, and not only was I learning them for free, but I was getting paid to learn them as well. So for me, I was like, great. This is a good alternative to college. Let me see what I can do with this. So I continued learning. Eventually, I realized that a lot of the time, in my relationship with David, when we were working together, I was taking more of the lead approach in terms of planning and, reporting and doing all that. So I noticed that I have those characteristics, to become a leader, to become a manager. So I had an opportunity then to become a lead and lead a small team of techs on a specific shift. Then from there, I also had the opportunity to take over as supervisor for our coach platform. And that's, within the department, it's broken up into supervisors for each type of product platform. And I was a supervisor for the coach platform. And for me, that was also exciting because I felt like, the top leadership in Siemens had recognized my qualities, my traits, my characteristics, and wanted to give me that chance. So I doubled down on that. And, a lot of time, even from talking with my parents, they said that, I had these managerial characteristics and qualities. Even from the time when we were kids, I would, convince my siblings to do the chores and do the work for very little investment on my end. And then, that kind of, most of the time it looked like me just walking around and ordering them around. Hey, do this, do that, do this. But my parents told me I'd make a good manager. So I kind of leaned into that, and most recently had the opportunity to take up the position of service operations manager in North Carolina. And so I had the opportunity to take up the position of service operations manager in North Carolina. And that basically means, running the department in North Carolina. It's going to be challenging for our first year, but it's something I feel like will be very rewarding. And, the whole thing about education is I'm really stoked that I dodged the student debt. We're just putting my wife through school now. She just actually finished last week. So she's doing her board exams this following week, and I'm pretty excited that she's done with school, and she actually, gets to be in the medical field as a respiratory therapist. I'm pretty proud of her for that, but, it was very expensive. It was, an 18-month program, and it cost us a pretty good chunk of money. So
the number.
Throw out, you want to hear numbers? So after it's all said and done, it was about 60 grand. Oof. 60 grand for 18 months. But I don't think that it's necessary for people to go to college. And I feel like industries a lot of time, well, even now, are kind of migrating away from that and looking at people's hard skills, people's experience, and what they're actually able to do, right? And I kind of live by this quote and this mantra of, success is a sum of small efforts repeated consistently. So whether it's in school, whether you're learning on your own, small efforts, developing yourself, your character, your skills consistently over time equals success. And I've been able to follow that model and kind of be successful in my role. And I would say have a pretty good salary, a pretty good job, without a 4-year degree. During my job at Siemens, I was able to go through a program for project management from the Project Management Institute. I got my certificate, so I'm a certified project manager now. I'm still in operations, but project management is definitely one of the avenues that I could take if I wanted to. But I think at this point, I'm getting to the ceiling of what I can achieve without a degree. And I'm really considering going back to school part-time now that I feel like I have my priorities set and I understand what school will mean for me and how to get there. I am considering going back to school for sure.
Wow, you did this whole thesis of like meritocracy is still alive. You can just like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, start on the ground floor, work yourself up into management, and then you end with, I still want to go to school. Sometimes I feel like what drives a lot of people to perform and outperform others, it's like this little insecurity. Well, I didn't get this piece of paper to validate me, so I'll have to prove it to them through my hard work, through my competency, through my abilities. And a lot of these people end up working harder because that insecurity, and I'm not saying you have this insecurity, but I've been noticing that even at my workplace, people try to prove themselves versus people with a master's degree will just rest on their laurels and say, well, I don't have to prove anything. I've already proved it in school.
It's very real.
And so, for you to go back to school, you have to look at the ROI of like the MBA program is kind of dying out, this managerial class of, MBAs that's been the system, right? You get your 4-year, start working, get your MBA, get promoted. I think that whole system is breaking down. We've seen like Meta, a lot of tech companies kind of leaning out their workforce and getting rid of managers and just leaving the people doing the actual work. And I think that model is more sustainable. And so I don't know if you need to go back to school. I'm not saying don't go back to school.
Well, for me, it's more like, I look at school as not a prerequisite, but as an opportunity to learn a skill. And I'm not saying that I want to specifically go back to school to further my career on what I'm doing now. But like, for instance, I don't like to talk about much of what I'm doing before actually achieving it. But for me, I really want to learn business and learn how to operate a successful business, because I do see a future of where, I am a business owner.
Hold on. I got to stop you right there. Do you really think that you need to go to school to learn how to become a businessman? No. You just said you learn through doing, and that's what you were able to achieve. So how's going to school, learning about business how's that going to help you? I mean, I think that's the one thing where you don't need a business degree.
I feel like it's the nuances of owning a business. I feel like it's the framework. Like, it's easy to start a business, but it's hard to have a business succeed and be successful.
If you had to open a business, what kind of line of business would you be in?
It's hard. It's hard to answer that, because I've thought of a bunch of different things, and occasionally I'll watch some videos and it'll be like something I'm interested in, and there will always be that one video where it's like, starting this business is the worst idea and here's why, So like those things kind of play into my perspective a little bit, and I'm like, man, maybe it isn't a good idea. But like, for me, something I've always been interested in, well, I wouldn't say always, but recently been interested in is like small scale manufacturing of like furniture. And most specifically, poker tables. That was one of my little side gigs and hobbies that I had.
Here's what you need for that. You need maybe some woodworking classes that you can take at like a local community college.
Well, the woodworking is not the hard part for me. For me, it's more of the, how to set up a business, how to have that business.
LegalZoom.com, sponsor me.
What is it?
LegalZoom.com.
LegalZoom.com.
You go in there.
I'm not saying like
open up an LLC. That's all you do.
That's all the easy stuff. Get a business license, open the LLC. But like, how do you structure your business so that all your finances are in order? How to source funding, how to do all those things.
You need the proof of concept before you scale, right? So you got to sell a couple of those, and I think I did see you kind of set up a page and sell a couple of them. I think from there, marketing is really the big part. And I don't think you're going to learn that at a university. You can learn marketing by, just trying Google ads, Meta ads, whatever it is, filming a viral TikTok, and then, sponsoring it. And
I like that you checked me. I like that you checked me and said, well, you've been so successful. Why do you need to go to school? And I think there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. I don't know.
It sounds like you just want a degree, man. It sounds like you want a piece of paper to validate you.
Maybe it's that insecurity inside me that's like telling me like, I want that piece of paper. I've been able to achieve
telling you,
something.
the more you think about the educational system right now, how outdated it is, how overpriced it is, I think there's still value for like hard sciences and STEM. Other than that, it's kind of useless. Like, especially with AI, coming on to the scene, like, looking at our kids and the way they're going to be learning in school, K through 12 and college. Like, you don't need a lot of the memorization approach where you have to memorize dates of battles or memorize certain definitions. AI will be always available to answer
my
these.
My parents were telling me how, back in the day when they were in school, they had to memorize quite a bit, and like not just memorize, but recite it like word for word, and in front of the class. That was a big thing. Do you think that's a skill that we no longer need, and that's a bad thing, or do you think that it doesn't really matter at the point where we have everything at our fingertips on the phone? I feel like that's a pretty big way to develop your overall your brain and how it works.
No, for sure. Being put on the spot. I think that's what the post-Soviet and Soviet school system had. They were really good about calling your name.
So people
out of the
were
list.
sharp,
You got to pay attention.
Yeah.
You're going to come out in front of the whole class of 30 kids. They're all watching you. You're going to get a problem statement from the teacher. You're going to, like, let's say it's a math class. You get an equation, you got to solve it. If you don't solve it, you're going to be made fun of. If you solve it, you're going to get kudos, and you're going to get that respect points, right? And so when I moved here and started school here in 2006, it's like, well,
culture shock, right?
Culture shock in terms of the grades, right? They would mask your name with your ID, and nobody really knows each other's ID, just so people are not embarrassed about getting an F.
Soft,
which is
super soft.
I mean, I also understand this perspective because I've seen the opposite side where people that got an F get made fun of in front of the whole class. It might kill their confidence for the rest of their life, but it's also a very good motivator not to get an F, not to be made fun of in front of the whole class. And so it keeps people more on edge and accountable. Like you said, your parents, you have to come out, you got to recite a poem in front of the whole class. If you stumble through it, guess what? People, will laugh at you. And so I think there is some value in that socialization aspect of education where you are operating within a little microcosm of, kids of your own age, and you interact with them, and you establish your hierarchy in terms of education, in terms of other, the social hierarchy or whatever. But yeah,
coming from Belarus and actually being a part of the education system there, would you say it was much easier for you when you moved here, or not?
Well, when I moved here and started high school, I didn't learn anything new in math for like 2 or 3 years. I was just like coasting. I was like, yep,
ahead of the curve.
Learned this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think I finally started learning new stuff in pre-calc, but even biology and chemistry and all these classes, we were 2 to 3 years ahead. And so, yeah, our K through 12 system here in the States is very soft, and I think it's getting softer. The tests are, getting dumbed down. The higher education system is really good. Like we have some of the top schools, obviously MIT, Stanford. Some of these schools are really, world level, renowned schools, and so they're holding the line. But K through 12, man, especially the public schools, it's a joke at this point. It doesn't say anything. The degree is not a statement of your qualifications.
Do you
in any
think
way.
that's just your experience in California?
Maybe it's just I was a product of public schools, and again, growing up in a different culture with different expectations, I had something to compare to.
Yeah,
so.
It's interesting you bring this up because I was in North Carolina last week. I met up with my father and my younger brother, and he's 14 now. He's in high school, and he was telling me he's so involved. Like he's got straight A's. He's doing wrestling. He's joining a mechatronics program as a freshman, in high school, and it's actually a program that it's going to be held in college. All of these programs, all of these extracurriculars, these STEM programs and opportunities that kids have in high school. There, I don't know if you see a lot of that here in California. Maybe at least from where I come from, I went to a middle to lower class high school where it was just super standard, nothing crazy. We had a football team and that was it, like some honor students, and that's it. Feels like the East Coast really pays more attention and invests more in their children and those programs.
I don't even know if it's East Coast versus West Coast. Maybe it's more driven by your zip code, right? Like again, going back, and I hate bringing up Belarus, back in my anyway.
Back in motherland.
Back in my hometown. So I lived through the result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the school systems were largely Soviet. When I started, I was born in 1993. So when I started out there, they still had that communist sort of, ideology of like every school is more or less the same. Yes, there's some schools that are more oriented towards STEM, There's schools that are more oriented towards humanities, but by and large, they're more or less the same throughout the city. Here, like if you thinking of Sacramento, your zip code determines the quality of your school. Are you in Folsom School District? Are you in North Highlands School District? You're going to get
North Highlands, baby.
North Highlands represent
Foothill High School, 2013. Let's go. Foothill Mustangs.
There you go. So you'll get two different, education. Your degrees will mean different things depending on, the zip code, depending on the funding for that specific school. So that's that's where this whole issue gets a lot more complex. I'm generalizing based on my subjective experience, maybe not being in the best zip code, going to high school here. I bet there are some high-end high schools that would put my post-Soviet school to shame, right? In terms of the academics, in terms of sports, et cetera, et cetera. But there's that discrepancy where your zip code determines your access to education. And that's why a lot of people look at that when they buy the house, right? I didn't know this until, way later, maybe.
Well, you've got what, Antelope High School pretty close. So I would consider that more, on the top tier, right? In terms of
the goal is to upgrade the zip code before my kid goes to school. I don't want to pay for private school. I just want to buy a house in a solid school district where, he's going to get the highest quality education. That's the goal. We'll see how reality unfolds.
I also think that the move to North Carolina for me, it's less densely populated, so there's less competition in terms of if I wanted to start a business, and in terms of taking my skill set maybe to another company. I feel like that'll be a positive thing about North Carolina is having that freedom and having that breathing room to try new things, because it's not so saturated as it is here in Sacramento, California.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to starting a business, you also want the market to sell to, right? So if you're in a small town and you're opening a restaurant, how many potential customers do you have, right? So obviously that issue is not an issue in a globalized market economy where you have access to selling online. So you can be producing that table in your house and then selling it online, shipping it out with disassembled components, right? So you're not necessarily tied to that geographic area. But it depends on the sort of business. Again, if you're going to stick with the poker table analogy,
that's just it's one of those things where it's not like I'm going in on this tomorrow, but it's just one of those things I've been bouncing around and thinking about, because it's just something I enjoy doing. Working with wood and making stuff, and whether it's furniture or other things, it just
super therapeutic, right? Just to get something done, and then the fulfillment you get, because how long does it take to build that cart? It probably takes a while, and then it's not like you built it yourself. You just did your part of the process. But when you build something from scratch, the fulfillment you get from it is just next level. And I think we're missing that in today's world where everything's digital, everything's online.
And there's a lot of services that do things for you. A lot of people pay, you need your house painted, you're going to pay somebody. You need to install cabinets, you're going to pay somebody. It's not so valued anymore to have those skill sets, because you can just pay someone to do it. Yeah.
I think especially you buying a house, you're going to do a lot of little things, a lot of DIY things around the house. Those are real confidence boosters. Like you feel more of a man. You get any little thing
Trust
done.
me, I already have like 2-3 projects I'm thinking about immediately after buying this house. Yeah,
one at a time. Don't stretch yourself too thin, or you're gonna get stressed out. But yeah, man, it's exciting. I'm excited for your new beginning, and I think you're gonna make it work. And if it sucks, come back and we'll record another episode of why moving to Carolina was a
bad idea.
But I don't think we're going to have that episode.
We'll see.
I don't think we need to see follow up unless we want to follow along with your journey and your exciting adventure in these North Carolinas.
I'm glad that you're developing this podcast and this channel. When you told me about it, when it started, I was pretty excited for you, because I was like, man, if there's one person that I know from my friend group that would be successful at something like that, would be Alex. And I remember talking to you about it, and I was like, man, just double down, try things, and go for it. And here you are going for it. And then I'm on your podcast doing an episode. So it's really cool to see that. I think you have a pretty creative skill set, and I feel like you'll make this work as well. I'm excited for this channel and see where it's going to go.
For sure. Well, appreciate you being on, man. Yeah. It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast. And safe travels. Hope you have a smooth transition to a new state. And I'm excited to visit.
Thank you. Yeah. Buy your tickets.
All right. It's a wrap.